think about the fact that in Ultron's mind, who created him? Iron Man, which means in his world, Iron Man is God. And he sees himself as this Jesus figure. He literally dies and is born again multiple times in this film when he tears himself in half and says, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger."
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of The Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers, so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us some of our favorite co-hosts. That's right, we got both Andrew and Avalon back with us to review the second in the Avengers trilogy. Excuse me. That's right, we are dealing with Avengers Age of Ultron. This was written and directed by, once again, Joss Whedon, to bring us the masterpiece we have today, dealing with the Avengers coming back in the sequel and dealing with the newest threat, the one created by Tony Stark himself, Ultron. We're going to get into it, but before we do, we want to get those initial impressions. Andrew, what is your first thoughts and rating for Avengers Age of Ultron?
This is not a Spider-Man movie.
Does it make you sad?
Yes, very. I think it's a good movie. I think it deals with some really good themes. The characters, I think most of, if not all of them, play directly into those themes, and I think their story arcs do as well. So,
and what is your rating, Andrew?
Oh, my rating. That's a good question. I have it written down. I gave it a 7.45.
Solid. That's a good one. Avalon, what are your thoughts?
I remember Age of Ultron disappointing me the first time around. I definitely think it's risen a little bit better in the years since. So it's definitely not a bad movie. I definitely think it was enjoyable to watch. And it definitely has some great themes going for it, but I don't know if it is some of those themes aren't as developed as well as they could be. So, but that's my personal take. I gave it a 5.44. 999999999. I don't know how that happened, but that again. Those nines like to show up every once in a while.
Every once in a while, yeah. We'll figure that out at some point. So we're getting the disparity again, just flip this time. Andrew's up on the high end, Avalon's down at the low end, and I am once again right there in the middle with a 6.4. I really like some things about this movie, just a ton. And honestly, it was my turn to be on the scale of going, I think I could be convinced to raise it higher this time, just because I feel like there's just so many great things going on with this. At the same time, I recalled not liking this movie as much when it came out as well, and I was curious why that's the case. I think some of those things came to mind as I watched it this time, right? There's just so much going on that has a lot to deal with in such a short amount of time, because not only is it taking from the first one, building onto it, containing its own story as well, but also prepping for the next one in a very strong way. So there's so much going on that they have to deal with a lot, and the question is, can they do that effectively? I'm looking forward to seeing both cases being made for and against in this podcast. I'm sure we'll see that, but before we get too deep into it, we want to get to that summary so that people who are not familiar with the movie can know what we're talking about. So Andrew, you want to give everyone a summary of what Avengers Age of Ultron is all about?
Sure. The movie starts out with the Avengers ensemble going through European wilderness. It's the best description I've got. Going towards Von Strucker's hideout, or the last of the Hydra bases, in which they are pursuing the Loki scepter, presumably lost at some point between the first movie and this one. While there, they interact with the Maximoff twins, also known as Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, later on. They take Loki's scepter, and upon bringing it back, Iron Man decides he's going to toy around with it, experiment. And he finds out that there is artificial life within this staff. He takes that life and he plants it into, essentially wakes it up, makes it sentient. And in doing so creates Ultron, who goes on to be the villain of the film. And Ultron comes to the conclusion, after exploring the internet, no surprise, that humanity would be better off dead than alive.
Yep. Pretty much. That's what you got. So if you're curious to hear more about that, keep listening. We're going to plow right along as we always do, starting with that opening scene. You have Iron Man, you have the rest of the Avengers all going toward this base. They get inside. Tony Stark comes to get the scepter, and he has this vision of what's about to occur due to Wanda Maximoff messing with his brain and having him see the future in a dark way. What are your guys' thoughts on that opening scene? Andrew, you want to start us off?
I think the opener initially functions pretty similarly to how most of the MCU openers do. As the MCU progresses, we get a display of all the heroes' powers. Right, they're fighting different bad guys, and we can see each of them focused in on as the camera moves around the battlefield. I think the interesting part comes when you move into the base itself and you see Iron Man, the beginning of Iron Man's arc in this film. And it's interesting because it's not only creating a unique arc, it's taking elements that were left in the first Avengers film, where he throws the nuke into the Shatari army through the black hole that Loki opened up. And his fears about not being able to protect not only those he cares about, but the rest of the people in the world. And you even get some elements of this too in Iron Man 3, which follows directly after Avengers, if I'm not mistaken. And in this film, it's continuing that. And Scarlet Witch, her character, not with just Iron Man in this film, but in the opener, it's Iron Man, she kind of takes ideas that are already in his head and exacerbates them. And part of her character isn't just implanting ideas, it's simply heightening fears that characters already have. So I think it does a great job of setting up Iron Man's story arc, great job of setting up who Scarlet Witch is in the MCU, making her ominous too as a villain. Granted, she does end up turning later in the film, but as one of the main antagonists for a good portion of the film, does a good job of setting her up with this, setting the stakes up with her and making her a threat to the rest of the Avengers.
Yeah, for sure. And just as a sidebar, I think it's interesting that some of the powers you see with Wanda are pretty ominous, especially getting into people's heads. You don't really see that a ton moving forward with her in future films, except for maybe in the WandaVision series, where she's really just manipulating everything that's occurring in that universe. But that's more of a side. It's unfortunate you don't see more of that. That being said, Avalon, what are your thoughts on the opening of this film?
I mean, as far as showing Tony Stark's fear, like I think that was a good way of showing it. Um, Other than that, like, I mean, I didn't think there was a whole lot that stood out about that opening aside from that. I mean, aside from Tony Stark, like showing us his fear and everything. Everything else seemed standard, like what we'd seen in other superhero movies.
Sure, yeah,
It wasn't bad, but it just was standard. So
yeah, and I think that the standard is not unexpected at this point. What I'm really looking for is like, are they building something that's unique and effective for the story itself when they have these openers? And this is one of those ones that I thought did that pretty well, where they have not just, oh, it's just a fight, that they reestablish their powers, but they have some real stakes being built from the start of the film regarding Tony Stark, somewhat regarding Wanda and her brother, and all that good stuff that play into further along in the film. Now, one of the key points of this opening is the aspect of Tony Stark, right? He is this character who has been built up in the Iron Man series, and then you see it progress to this part where he is, even though he's not the leader, quote unquote, of the Avengers, it's actually Captain America, you see he's taking a leadership role and taking actions that have an impact on the rest of the team. My general impression was that he is the primary protagonist in this film compared to previously, where we had all of the characters. Is that something you disagree with, Andrew? Or Avalon?
With him being the protagonist, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd 100% say Iron Man's the main protagonist in this film.
I disagree, but I'm also like, I don't think this is the same situation as the last film where we had like, I mean, because in the last film we had like equal screen time more or less between a bunch of characters, so it's hard to say any of them were the main character, like over the others. This time around, I would definitely agree that Tony Stark is more of a central character, but I also feel like we're given a lot of screen time to Steve Rogers, I noticed throughout the movie. We're given a lot of screen time to Bruce Banner. We're given a lot of story beats to Natasha Romanoff. So I kind of felt like they all four, in some ways, were main characters of the storyline. And then you have Thor and Clint, who they kind of play supporting roles. They don't really play like a major like role in the story itself. And then you have Wanda and Pietro, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. And I feel like, I mean, I debated whether to call them main characters or side characters because of their roles in the story. I kind of landed on side characters just because of how they play in the story, but I also could be convinced that they were main characters as well, just because of how they are involved in the plot and what happens, especially their character development. But
Sure. And I think the reason I took the stance that I do is just because you see them shift, and I don't know if this was intentional, a move by Josh Whedon as he saw how the first one played out and decided to take a different route with this one, but he took more of a Guardians of the Galaxy-esque route where you have, sure, a team up with a lot of different characters, and you definitely get screen time to a lot of them, but the one who has the most stakes involved in the overall plot was Iron Man. So that's why I took the stance that I did, but feel free to provide your opinion as you go based off of how you analyze the film.
Hmm.
With that being said, what are you guys' thoughts on the primary character or characters? Do you think that they're compelling? Do you think they're not? And of course, we'll start again with Andrew.
I think Iron Man's pretty good. I gave him full points in terms of is he flawed and is it compelling. I think it does a really good job of building off the previous film. I think it does a really good job of his fears being rationalized in this film. You get him finding the scepter, you get him looking at the scepter, and he isn't necessarily looking at the scepter from the get-go to create Ultron, but he sees an opportunity to create, as he say, a suit of armor around the world. He sees it as a shield of protection. He doesn't see Ultron as this offensive weapon. He sees him as this protective barrier between them and any sort of foreign entity, i.e. the Chitauri, Loki, or even Thanos. And he has these visions of Thanos invading, and which prompts him to want to do this even more. And as the film progresses, he still kind of wants this protective shield, right? He pursues this vision, if you will, no pun intended, of creating another artificial intelligence. And this artificial intelligence ends up working, but it's not through his own hands, which I think really plays into the themes of this film. But we'll get to that later.
Sure. Ablon, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I would agree that Tony Stark is a pretty compelling character. Um, but I'm also going off the basis that, as I said before, that I think some of the other characters like Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff are also pretty central, and I consider them main characters in this story. Steve Rogers is the only one I kind of include who I don't think has any like flaw or anything that he doesn't like as a character. He's kind of static from beginning to end in this movie. So like in terms of character being compelling or anything, I don't think he fits the bill. And I don't know. I am conflicted about Natasha Romanoff as a character. Is she compellingly flawed in terms of as a main character? I kind of went back and forth on her character based on what I saw.
Okay.
So my opinion is a mixed bag. So I gave it middle of the road points because I had like depending what you saw. So if you're just saying Tony Stark, yes, he is compellingly flawed. But if you're including the others as I was, then that it's harder to give that. I didn't give it full points because of that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Tony Stark, I think the things that you mentioned are pretty key. And you see that combined, this horror that he sees in his vision of his mind of what's going to occur, where everyone is dead. And in some ways, the corpse of Captain America is calling out to Tony and says, "You could have saved us. Like, you were the person who could have stopped this from happening," is a huge thing that sticks in his mind. And he goes, "I need to stop this from happening. I need to stop the future from occurring that I just saw in my mind." And so that is like this impetus for creating Ultron, something that he already had inclinations for anyways, because he wants to stop this project from being a continual part of his life. And so he takes these steps forward, more or less, right? And the idea that I think that was interesting is that some of the lines that they use, they're very good with like the foreshadowing, but also with like these callbacks to other cultural references within the lines that they give. And one of the lines that they give, I believe, is "peace in our time," which I believe is a callback to Chamberlain's references back during World War II, where he's doing these negotiations with Hitler before the war occurs, and he goes, "We can have peace in our time," and he strives for that as he tries to stop the war from happening. Turns out he's ineffective at that in the same way that Tony Stark is ineffective in this film, where he is not able to actually stop the war from occurring, and actually, in some ways, in this film, causes the war to occur because of the actions that he takes. So I just love the little bits they added like that really added to a broader cultural discussion that's going on in the film. Anyways, yeah, I thought that Tony Stark's development was really crucial to this, and that's where he takes the scepter and he uses it to develop this character of Ultron, who then, once it becomes sentient and alive, attacks Jarvis, who was the counter to him at the time, and then starts to go on a rampage to try to build himself up to become this powerful being to, quote unquote, create what he was destined for, peace within their time. I think this is the appropriate time to talk about the villain at this point. What are you guys' thoughts on Ultron? Do you think Ultron is a compelling force, a compelling threat to the Avengers? Do you not? And why? Avon, go ahead.
I actually think Ultron is probably one of the stronger points of this movie because I think he is actually fairly well developed as a character. I mean, he's an AI machine, but he also has emotions and his own like thoughts, and he's also like very hard to kill, very hard to get rid of, and he's and his like conclusion that humanity is the problem is logical and follows everything that like when what we're shown of him, it follows and it makes sense.
Yeah, did you think that his motivations were compelling? I mean, in some ways, he seems as a machine, right? He's an artificial intelligence, but he has a lot of emotion tied to his birth as the creature of Tony Stark. Do you think that is a unique take, an interesting take? Does it make sense?
It makes sense. It's a. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question again?
Well, it's like usually when you think of robots and machines, you think of them as cold-hearted, calculated, very logical creatures, right? More or less. And you see this in other films, such as Ex Machina, right? Where even though they are being emotionally manipulative, they are still, at the end of the day, a sentient, 1-0 calculative machine that is trying to achieve a specific goal they have been destined to try to achieve. In some ways, you get some of that with Ultron, but at the same time, you get a very emotional response. And you see that later on in the film, for example, when they're dealing with the weapons dealer. Do you think that this makes sense for a character like Ultron?
In the world of the MCU, yes. If we're going to talk pure reality, no. Because, I mean, I don't know if the whole emotional aspect of Ultron makes sense for a machine to have. It kind of comes out of nowhere in some ways, and we're not given a fully developed explanation as to why he's this emotional being as well as logical. So, in that way, and machines just aren't that way. So, in a realistic sense, it doesn't follow. But in the MCU, like, if you're talking just... I mean, because the staff, the Mind Stone, is this fantasy element that we don't fully understand what it does and everything, you can kind of give like reasonable doubt and belief, like, oh, there were some effects that it had on Ultron and made him this way. So, I mean, you can like explain it within the realm and rules of the MCU. So,
yeah, for sure. Andrew, what are your thoughts on Ultron?
Oh, I think Ultron might be my favorite Avengers villain. And I think this movie does such a cool take on Ultron for a couple of reasons. One, the amount of biblical references that he makes in this film is kind of insane. And when you think about the fact that in Ultron's mind, who created him? Iron Man, which means in his world, Iron Man is God. And he sees himself as this Jesus figure. He literally dies and is born again multiple times in this film when he tears himself in half and says, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." I mean, I made a list of some of the quotes. When Pietro asks him what happens if humanity fails to improve, he just goes, "Ask Noah." And then he has this line when he's talking, and he says, "When the earth starts to settle, God throws a stone at it, and believe me, he's winding up." Um, and then he also talks about, he says the line, "On this rock I build my church." And so he literally sees himself as this savior-esque figure akin to that of Jesus, which is heretical, but also makes for a very interesting villain because he doesn't see a world in which he could be wrong. And he's taking the programming that Iron Man gave him, right? He's this weird accumulation of Hulk and Iron Man and the Mind Stone, and his character is meant to he sees peace, right? But because he is a robot, because he sees things logically, he cannot live with imperfections. And humanity, by default, has imperfections. And he sees these imperfections, which others will look at and say they are what make humanity unique and worth saving. Says, no, those are what make humanity worth killing off. And the only way to move on is to evolve. And he references like the dinosaurs and the meteor killing them off. And that's what Sokovia is to him. It is his meteor, and it is meant to destroy the world and purge it of the things that are too weak to survive. And so I think, right, as the movie progresses, I think the emotional aspect of Ultron is really compelling too, because as it progresses, Ultron becomes more and more emotional. And you can see this, especially when he starts to link his consciousness to the Vision body before it becomes Vision. He starts to develop these emotions, and Scarlet Witch says, "I can see into your head." And she sees like this carnage and chaos and destruction. And it's what ultimately causes her and Pietro to dissent and leave him. But his character is meant to be evolving, right? He physically evolves, he emotionally evolves, his ideas evolve. Because initially his idea is, oh, I'm meant to be a suit of protection around the world. And then when he looks at the world and the things he's meant to protect it from, he ends up conflating the two and saying, okay, well, humanity is a scourge on the world. I'm meant to protect the world itself, the life that exists on this planet, right? He sees his mission as protecting the planet, not necessarily its inhabitants, because the inhabitants wreak chaos and destruction, which is what he is built and programmed to stop or prevent.
Yeah. And even in the way he's trying to destroy the people of the world is also riddled with biblical allegory, where he looks at the church that he is building it on. He says that they built this church in the center of the city, and he's like, I love that. It's so interesting, the geometry of belief, right? And he's even taking religious ideas and conflating them with an AI type mind and saying like, this can all be algorithmized, full of his yes, whatever that word is. He's putting it all together in his mind and saying, oh, this all fits together into one perfect piece, right? And the idea of, once again, of on this rock I will build my church, you see, actually conflates that to be, I will literally build this future foundation on this church as he builds the machine in the base of the church that will then lift the rock out of the ground and then send it hurtling back to destroy all of humanity. So yeah, definitely very interesting how he takes all of those ideas and conflates them together. Totally.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I wrote down for Ultron, he's both terrifying and oddly charismatic. He reflects Tony Stark's worst qualities, arrogant superiority, and the belief that he alone knows what's best. I think also, by the way, I made note of this, James Spader's voice acting for him is just, so good. He's like menacing, but also strangely human in a lot of the things that he does, which also makes him, again, very interesting as a villain. So. I will say one thing that makes him very interesting in relation to the Avengers is similar to how Loki was all about causing chaos in the first one. I think the fact that he is pushing for the fact that humanity is weak ties in really well with the way that he fights against the Avengers, or utilizes Scarlet Witch rather, to fight against them and forcing them to confront their weaknesses and accept them as part of the human experience.
Yeah. For sure, because it's striking at their core in a lot of ways and saying like, hey, you have to address this issue at your base, and can you really do that? A couple things that were also interesting alongside that is, one, going back to the allegory of who he is and seeing himself as the savior, is he makes the reference later on in the film where he says, I was meant to be new. I was meant to be beautiful. The world would have looked to the sky and seen hope, seen mercy, right? And this idea that he is this savior to the world that will save everything, but it's not necessarily to save humanity, it's to save the world as a whole from humanity. And so this becomes his impetus, his drive, and he sees that as he progresses and as he develops, right, as he evolves in his own words, he sees himself as being freed from the shackles of humanity, where he ultimately rejects the call of Tony Stark to be this shield around the world for humanity and says, no, I'm going to be free in my own way, and I'm going to free the world from humanity's shackles as a whole. So, very interesting how they developed his character, very interesting how they developed all these themes. Yet at the same time, you see this idea that even as a AI, because he's built from Tony Stark, he has this idea that he needs to have humanity there, and he desperately wants that. And you see that in the fact that when Wanda later on in the film ends up betraying them and saying, I'm not going to follow you anymore. He says, please don't do this. And then he runs away, but takes Black Widow with him. And then he starts to monologue to her a little bit. And he has his little villainesque talk with her. But in the middle of that, he basically says, oh, I wanted to show you this. I had no one else, which points to the yearning that he has that he can't escape from with humanity, where he wants to be connected to humanity, even at the same time that he's trying to destroy it. So it's interesting. Excuse me. It's interesting how they have these pieces in there that are like both showing him as this menacing force, but at the same time, he's conflicted within himself of saying, oh, I want this, but I also need to do this other thing because I feel this calling of what my goal in all of the universe is to destroy humanity. Now, as you see in the film very early on, he uses Wanda and his own power to break into the psyche, especially when he's dealing with the conflict with the arms dealer, and they end up tearing the entire party apart from the inside as they have to deal with their own psyche, as Andrew mentioned. What are you guys' thoughts as the film progresses, as these conflicts come to a head, and they realize that they're not adequate to face this threat in their own individual minds? Do you think that's compelling? What are your thoughts, Andrew?
There's so much here. And I think I'm willing to have this bounce back and forth. I think they actually do pretty well with how much they're trying to accomplish. And I think because the reason they're able to do that is because they find creative ways to take things that would normally rely on a longer time span in a movie and find ways to narrow it down. One of those is Wanda basically triggering these visions in all of them. You get to see the flaws and the fears of every single one of the Avengers in a very brief span of time. And I think there's also a lot going on within those visions. So, like, I mean, let's take Captain America's vision, right? You have a quote from Ultron in the movie when he's talking to Captain America, when he confronts him and he says, Captain America, God's righteous man, pretending you can live without a war. They don't really expand upon this, which I think is interesting, although I'm not necessarily upset about it, because I think if they truly tried to explore every single one of these characters, like plot, like arcs in depth, you would have a terrible movie. But I think it gives us just enough insight into Captain America to make him compelling as a side character. You have this idea that Captain America was bred for war. He lives to fight. You see that even in the first Avengers movie. He's sitting in a boxing ring, just punching a beanbag because he has nothing better to do. Captain America, Winter Soldier, what is he doing? He's working for S.H.I.E.L.D. And when S.H.I.E.L.D. goes under, what does he do? He puts on his suit and his shield again. He goes back to fight. This movie, it's the same thing. He's fighting again. And what Ultron's essentially posing to him is, you can't live in a world where war doesn't exist. You need conflict to exist in order to justify your very existence. And so Captain America's dream is him living in a world without war. He's spending time with Peggy Carter, and he's like just confused, and like you have to read into it a little bit, I'll grant you, but I think it's interesting that that's the vision he has when you also look in relation to what Ultron, the question or the statement he poses to him later on in the film.
The question, oh, you mean Captain America to Ultron?
No, Ultron, when he says God's righteous man, pretending you can live without a war.
Oh, that line specifically. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. And
I
and
mean,
that's something that he has to struggle with, where he has to figure out, well, what is my place in this war or in this world? And that does actually in some ways foreshadow the future films where Captain America has to deal with that in full force. But for sure, this first one, it definitely adds a dynamic that's at least hinted at in this film.
yeah. I mean, I think I just covered Captain America. I think there's others. I did want to open it up for discussion, so I'm not rambling for like 10 minutes straight.
Sure. Avalon, what are your thoughts on Captain America in this part of the film?
I think it serves benefit in terms of showing insight into his psyche, but I don't know if it really has any bearing on his character arc because he doesn't really have any. He doesn't change as a result of the Vision or anything like that. He is still the same Captain America before the Vision and after the Vision. And even by the end of the movie, there's not really a whole lot of change that Vision has on him. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's an interesting moment in the movie, sure, but I don't know if it really has a whole lot of benefit outside of the insight.
right. And this goes back to how you have evaluated this film slightly differently than us, seeing them all as primary characters in this film. Um, in both Andrew and my mind, it sounds like we see Captain America as more of a side character who's a sounding board and a counter, if you will, to Tony Stark and everything that he's doing and saying, no, it's not okay. No, we need to do the right thing, etc., etc. Very stereotypical of Captain America to do, right? And so the idea that he doesn't change in that, especially when he's proven right in a lot of ways, isn't surprising at all. But at least this gives a hint into his own individual struggles and where he's going with it. But what are your thoughts, Avalon, on let's go with the Black Widow and Hulk work. Do you think that that area is compellingly developed at this point in the film?
I would say it was an interesting like subplot of the movie. I guess. I mean, it's interesting like showing of their reveal of their characters and how they where they come from and where they're hoping to go, like what they're hoping to achieve in some ways. That's all I have at the moment. I am.
No, you're good. Andrew, what are your thoughts on the Hulk and Black Widow?
so unfortunately, I think this film does continue the trend of making the Hulk the least compelling Avenger, in my opinion. You have a pretty movie for him in the phase one. We talked about this in the last podcast. He doesn't end up being that compelling, and I think in this film he ends up being, in my opinion, the least compelling Avenger. Now, Black Widow, on the other hand, I think is done really well in regards to how she relates back to the themes of this movie. And so, as we progress, I think what I'm going to do is just take the themes that I think each character represents in relation to the themes this movie's presenting, as well as how the character develops. So with Black Widow, right? You have the themes, you have her character herself. I think the themes Black Widow represents is primarily, more so than the other Avengers, accepting your humanity, accepting the flaws that humanity brings with it, and showing how it can make you a better, a stronger person in the end. And you see that in her vision. What is her vision? It is her scarred history of the torture she endured in the Red Room. And you see even her interactions with Bruce Banner, which I think he becomes like a side character of a side character in my mind, because he's almost like a side character to Black Widow's side character in this film, where she is going through this kind of journey of accepting that the Red Room, she would not be who she is without it. And so Ultron would want to take away all of those imperfections, but in taking away those imperfections, you take away some of the strongest characters you have. There's a quote I really like. I don't actually know who said it, but it goes something along the lines of the strongest souls are those who are have the most scars. And so it's this idea that in life you're going to suffer, and the suffering you endure can either make you stronger or it can break you. And Ultron actually ends up echoing this when he says, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger," which is very poetic that he ends up saying it to Black Widow of all people, because she has suffered probably the most out of all of the Avengers up until this point. So that said, I think her character, I kind of tried to come up with little bits to summarize. what each character represents. And for her, I just wrote down flaws are what define humanity. It's what makes humanity unique. And then I think her exploration of that humanity alongside Bruce Banner makes her an interesting character.
And you even get some hints of that being the case with Vision, who, jumping pretty much to the end of the film at this point, but he's more or less has a monologue about that with Ultron at the very end, where Vision says, yes, there are flawed individuals. They're not going to do everything perfectly, but that's part of the beauty of experiencing the world, is seeing these people with their flaws and accepting being part of the world at this time and in this place where you are right here, rather than trying to reject it and destroy it and make it new in your own image. So definitely a strong theme for sure when you see that in the film. What are your thoughts on let's just go with Thor at this point. What are your thoughts on Thor?
Thor is one of the Avengers that I think they do more work setting up future films than actually echoing the themes of this one. And I think he does present an interesting foil to Iron Man, though. And that's that fear does not dictate his fate. So if you look at Iron Man's vision in the beginning of the film, it is a vision of this terrible future that's going to destroy everything. How does he react? He ends up creating Ultron. Thor has a terrible vision about his people dying in Ragnarok. He sees Heimdall with his eyes gouged out and his people going up in flames. His reaction to this isn't just desperately find some way to protect everyone. It's to find out what is Ragnarok? What is this impending doom that's coming? How can I fight against it rather than trying to control every single facet of this? Again, it's not super well, it's not explicitly laid out, but I think that the conclusion that Thor's character is meant to represent is that your fears don't necessarily have to result in catastrophe, which is what Iron Man ends up, what ends up happening to Iron Man in this film.
And definitely, it's also foreshadowing everything that's going on with Thanos in the next couple of films with Avengers and all of the stones that appear to have power. All of that stuff is a core element to his arc, and it's definitely just started in this film and not really completed. So for sure, he is, of all of these primary characters, more so leading to the meta story that is being developed here, rather than necessarily having his own unique, tight bow end, smiley face arc that you would get for a lot of these other characters. Alan, what are your thoughts?
I really struggle where to place Thor in this movie. And that's only because, in my mind, he's a side character who helps with the major plot points at a few places along the way. But on his own, he's, I don't want to say distraction, but he almost felt like a distraction sometimes. Like, in the scenes where he's with the group helping this main storyline along, he is helpful, I guess. He is definitely advancing the story in some scenes. But they're just the scenes where he's off by himself. I didn't see the overall benefit to them in the overall arching story of this particular movie. In the overarching narrative of the MCU, sure, I see what those scenes did. But if we're just taking this movie on its own and its own merits of its own story, I just don't see how those scenes benefited this movie at all. So
Sure. And that's definitely why I thought that this film was so jam-packed compared to some of the other ones, is that they have so much going on. And looking back, you can look at it and say, oh, this is so cool. They have all of this stuff in Age of Ultron that's foreshadowing what's going to happen in Avengers Infinity War and in Avengers Endgame. But when you watch it for the first time, it's just so much is going on that you as the audience are a bit pulled away from the story that is going on right here and now, because they're trying to foreshadow all these other things at the same time so much. So I would definitely agree that while he has an interesting arc and it's definitely fascinating from like a meta-analysis of everything that goes on in the MCU, him as a compelling character in this film, not so much. Andrew, do you have any pushback to that?
I mean, I don't think he necessarily has an arc in this film. Again, why I had like no problem putting him in the side character category. And I don't think all side characters are created equally. I think that Thor is meant to bring the plot forward, represent a theme, and foreshadow. And like, I go back to Attack on Titan a lot. I think this is very akin to some of the scenes we get with Eren, where we have these visions he has. where in the moment we may not be sure what they're supposed to mean, but in hindsight you can look back and go, oh, that's really cool. Or you can sit there for days and ponder what the heck this is supposed to mean, like most people did when they're watching Attack on Titan as it's coming out. And so I think his character, he provides comedic relief right at the beginning, moves the story forward. I think he's a good foil to Iron Man's character. So,
Sure. And, the story progresses from there regardless of Thor's specific involvement in it. While it is interesting and adds to it to some degree, it definitely is still being thrust forward as each of these characters deals with their own struggle, right? Moving forward into Ultron and him trying to create this new body, which is an organic material built with machine involved so that he can inhabit the body, right? And they go to stop this machine from being created, or this man-machine amalgam, and then they end up, losing Black Widow. They end up gaining the twins on their side, and you have the, all of these things going on all at once. What are your thoughts on the continuation of the film, especially in regards to some of the characters that we haven't discussed as in depth as they've developed? Characters, for example, like Wanda Maximoff and Tony Stark. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
So I actually really like Clint Barton in this film, Hawkeye. I think again, all these characters and the themes they represent are all intimately tied. And so with Hawkeye, the ideas I get from him is that there's strength in this human connection. And you get this line from his wife where she talks about how he's surrounded by gods, and yet he is the one who has to hold this team together because he's the most, how he's human, but they are more human than they think, referring to all of the flaws and struggles that they have. And it's also interesting, right? You talk about Ultron is craving this human connection. Hawkeye has that. And you see that of all the Avengers, he struggles the least in terms of his own personal flaws. Like when Wanda's messing with their brains, he sticks an arrow on her head and says, been there, done that, not a fan. And I think it's also really interesting when they go to the house and they see Barton's family. One, I think it was really cool to actually give Hawkeye some sort of like depth other than I'm a guy who shoots arrows. He very much cares about his family. He's a family man. He's got 3 kids. He really cares about them. Even though he's off saving the world with the Avengers most of the time. There's a scene though, I don't know why this stuck with me, where I think it's Captain America or maybe it's Hulk. One of them steps on a Lego brick and like crushes it. And to me, that was just like the entirety of the film's
my Legos.
It was the entirety of the film's message of there's beauty in imperfection, like encased in this one tiny blip on the screen. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's just something that stuck out to me when I was watching it this time through. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. That aside, I think Hawkeye just provides a good emphasis on the themes. His character doesn't necessarily change throughout the film, but again, he's a side character in my mind, so I don't know that he needs to change in terms of his arc.
Bro just wanted to see the Lego allegory played out.
Sure.
He just wanted to make this film feel like a classic art house piece.
Exactly. Avalon, what are your thoughts?
I like Clint Barton. I actually like Hawkeye's character not just in the movies but in the comics as well. In a world of heroes, he's the one guy who's just like a normal guy who just shoots a bow and arrow, and he's really good at it, sure, but he's also like oftentimes a grounding force. So he's not some superhero really. He's kind of a normal guy trying to save the world and trying to protect everyone. Mm-hmm. So I did appreciate Hawkeye's character in the story. He definitely gave him more depth as a character overall, and it was an interesting reveal. I mean, that's not really much else to say about him. He's a side character who adds some support, and he's interesting. So,
and from there you see they get Vision, right, or they get the body that will become Vision at that point in the film. Wanda joins the team and Black Widow's gone, right? We already talked about the monologue between Ultron and Black Widow, but what are your guys' thoughts on the creation of Vision at this point in the film? Do you think that Vision was a good add at this point to this already complex film?
Even after watching the movie, I'm still kind of formulating what I think about Vision because I remember when I first watched the Age of Ultron, Vision was one of my favorite parts of Age of Ultron back when I first watched it. Now, like I'm just like thinking about it. He's definitely not my favorite part of the movie anymore, but I do think he's an interesting mirror per se to Ultron in some ways, where it's like he is because they're kind of both created the exact same way in some regards, but they're different. They're vastly different in who what they stand for, what they believe in some ways. It's just like they're not like and they're both not pure robots either. They both have emotions and feelings and other stuff going on that defines them. Um, they are logical, sure, but they're more logical than the average human being is what I meant. But they're still very emotional and human characters.
Sure.
So
And maybe I'll tell you what my thoughts are on him, and then I'll get some thoughts from Andrew. But I think as interesting as a character that Vision is,
mhm.
this is where I think the film really starts to take a hit in regards to a couple of ways. One is that from the point that Vision really enters the scene, it goes from a situation where the Avengers are constantly losing against Ultron, right? There's this constant uphill battle that they're facing, and sure, they get this small win by getting the uh, chamber that houses the body, but then they lose Black Widow. Before that, they had all been an absolute wreck from having faced Ultron previously. The Avengers' main tower had been turned to a pulp from the initial fight with Ultron. There's all these situations that they've had that are constantly making things worse and worse, and they're having to try to deal with that and figure out the best response. From the point that Ultron enters the scene, it pretty much is them winning from there on out, and it's a situation of all I do is win no matter what, right? And this is basically one of my bigger issues with the film is that it doesn't like really have them struggle as soon as this character enters the scene. Feels a little Deus Ex Machina esque for me to just like have this almost godlike character come and just make everything right in conjunction with the rest of the team. Do you agree with that, Andrew? Do you not? What are your thoughts?
Yes and no. I understand the sentiment. I think there's still a struggle on the Avengers part, right? You have Quicksilver die, even though I think the way he dies is pretty lame. I think the fact that he dies is more important. You have Sokovia getting completely obliterated and the debris going on to kill tons of people and create the character known as Baron Zemo. Um, I think Vision as a character outside of the plot is interesting in the ways that he relates back to Ultron. Because Ultron sees evolution as, he sees destruction as a necessary component of evolution. Whereas Vision represents this idea of hope and balance, per se. This idea that evolution doesn't mean destroying the old, it means improving the world as we see it and preserving the life that exists on it, all of it. He also sees the imperfection in humanity. And there's this dialogue. I don't remember all the exact words, but he basically tells Ultron the beauty in humanity lies in their imperfections. And yes, there's going to be wars and death and destruction and chaos, but through it all, there will still be beauty and moments of peace and happiness. And that is worth all of that, even though, right, we wouldn't want this destruction and death. Does it make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So
Um,
I think Ultra Vision, it is a lot of characters, I will concede. And I remember the first time watching this going, there's a lot going on. I think going back and watching it, for the scale that they're going for, I really enjoy the film that ended up coming out of this, right? I think they did a really good job of taking so many characters, hyper focusing on Iron Man and his relationship with Ultron, taking all of the Avengers and still giving them compelling reasons to be involved in this fight, as well as flaws and motivations, and then resolving those issues as the film progresses, right? I don't know that Captain America necessarily changes as the film progresses, but I think what he comes to the conclusion of is that he is created as this protector. And I think one of my favorite lines in the film, even though it doesn't necessarily relate back to the overarching themes, is when Captain America and Iron Man are splitting wood in Hawkeye's yard. And Iron Man is venting. He's going like, I'm trying to save everyone. How can you not see that? And Captain America tells him, every time you try to stop a war before it happens, innocent people get hurt. And what's really cool about this is immediately right before this, you had Captain America Civil War, or not Civil War, Winter Soldier. And Captain America's literally already lived through this, in which you're trying to create world peace, in essence, by destroying anyone who would stand in your way. And he sees Ultron very similar to that. And so I think, right, I think that the characters are done very well. And I think Vision, even though he's added towards the end, I think at the end of the day, he's a net positive to the film, even though I think that they could have done some things better.
Sure. And kind of going off of that, maybe as like a second counter, my other issue with this scene specifically, because I think that that's an interesting analysis, is in this moment you're dealing with the issue of Iron Man, right? And this character who is striving for peace in our time, right? And this was the impetus for dealing with the scepter and then creating this AI that would create this shield around the world. And then you see that it fails. He creates Ultron, who is a bigger problem than what they had originally. And then they come back to having this being, this body, and he decides to use it in a similar way to what he had just done with Ultron, to recreate it, but this time with Jarvis, and it's going to be okay. It seems like they just excuse where Tony Stark is going with this, because they say, okay, well, he does the same thing again, and the difference is this time it works out. Do you feel like in this way, in some ways, this undermines Tony Stark's character?
Okay, re-explain that real quick because I got distracted by Avalon's text.
Yeah, so in regards to Tony Stark's character, you see that he starts the film with this idea of creating Ultron to create the shield around the world. He's basically creating this machine, and he works with Bruce Banner to create it, and there's some concern there, but he pushes through no matter what and creates it and causes all these problems. In the case of Ultron, you have a similar situation, really, where you see that Ultron is created, or you see, I'm sorry, with Vision, you see Vision is once again a item placed before Iron Man, and he says, "Oh, see, here's another opportunity to create something," and it's very similar to, "Oh, this is an opportunity to create something just like he did with Ultron previously." And the difference between the last time where he does this with Ultron and this time doing it with Vision is it works out. So he's doing the same type of action that he started at the beginning of the film with that caused all the problems, and does it again, and it just happens to have a good solution or good outcome in this case. Do you think that that undermines Tony Stark's character or his character arc?
I think yes and no. I definitely see where you're coming from, and I do agree that on the surface, I would say yes. I think there's a little bit of nuance here, in that I think in Iron Man's mind, he's created Ultron, who's this destructive weapon he's incapable of stopping at this point. And so he needs a new ace. And so he's creating Vision not as a suit around the world, right? His motivations changed from creating the perfect world to creating something that can help them combat Ultron, while also taking these, right? There's a body placed in front of him. He finds Jarvis, and he's just going to put Jarvis into Vision. So in a way, yes, I think the difference in my mind is that he has a completely different motive here. It's not the hubris, it's not the fear that's guiding him in this decision. It is, we need to stop Ultron, and I have no other answer right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, definitely. And I see how they come to that conclusion. I'm still not convinced that it doesn't undermine the arc that they're trying to present with him, but yeah, I definitely see like the necessity of creating Vision in this moment, right? So, anyways, let's move on to the climax, and then we'll talk about the lasting impact of this film. You see that they come to a head where they fight Ultron and all of these other, all of his minion versions of himself, if you will, in Sokovia, and they end up fighting off the threat of him being there and destroying all of his underlings, stopping him from being able to access the internet and being able to reproduce somewhere else. And then also at the same time, they end up destroying the giant rock that's going to meteorite destroy everything on the earth, similar to what happened with the dinosaurs. Do you think that the climax of the scene is compelling, in addition to all the stuff we have with Quicksilver and everything else? Everything goes on in this final climactic battle of the scene. Do you think that that's compelling? Go ahead, Andrew.
Symbolically, Ultron's actions are great, right? You have a literal meteor, like I mentioned before, dropping onto the Earth to cleanse it. You have the introduction of Wanda into the Avengers. I think thematically and for character development, this is the weakest scene. I don't know that necessarily makes it a bad scene, right? It's pretty stereotypical. You've got all the Avengers fighting the one bad guy. Massive destruction and chaos are in their wake. They're trying to save these people. I think it probably does a lot more for Civil War than it does for this film. I see it as almost just the necessity that this film has created, right? You've created all this tension. You have to release it somehow. How do you do that? Battle of epic proportions. The battle's cool. I think there's some pretty cool shots in the fight. I think you get to see all the Avengers' powers in this fight. You get a conclusion to Hulk's arc. He's still afraid of hulking out on people, and so the aftermath of the Hulkbuster incident, which we didn't really go into, but I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. You have Hulk going crazy, and you've got Iron Man with a cool suit of armor, and they're fighting. And that causes Hulk to fear, and so he leaves on the Quinjet, and that's where you find him later on in Thor Ragnarok. So I don't know that the battle itself was all that interesting thematically. I see it more as just the natural progression of the story. I actually find the end scene between Vision and Ultron much more interesting.
Yeah, I would generally agree. I mean, the problem with the scene is basically you have a million Ultrons, and you don't have a doubt really that they're going to be able to defeat more of these little guys when they were even able to some degree to neuter him at the beginning of the film when there was a bunch of him there. So I think that it was lackluster in that regard, and also it just felt a little drawn out to me. So other than the fact that they have all the symbolic ideas presented in it and some great lines from Ultron and the cool fight scene, it really kind of lacked, and Quicksilver wasn't developed enough, in my opinion, to make him a compelling death. And part of that is, once again, they just have so much going on that it's like, sure, if they had added just a little bit more of Quicksilver, it might have been something that we're like, oh, shoot, Quicksilver's dead. But because he was just introduced in this film, and honestly, he gets a lot less screen time than Wanda Maximoff, his sister, does, it's hard to make the case that he's like this super important character for the Avengers at this point in the film.
I think the problem with Quicksilver is that throughout the film, he's a side character, right? But he's not a side character we can really empathize with. We empathize with Wanda Maximoff way more because we get to see that pain expressed. Whereas Pietro's just kind of, he's fast and he's arrogant, and he kind of just rubs it in everyone's face. And even when he's a good guy, he's still fast and he's arrogant. And when he's fighting, he's fast and he's arrogant. And then he gets shot up and you're like, wow, the one quality that you had, which was being fast and arrogant, couldn't save you from a bullet. Oh no, boo-hoo, cry me a river. So, not really a fan of his character. He does good for making Wanda scream and cry, but other than that, pretty disappointing considering how much I actually like his character in theory.
Mm-hmm. Albert, what are your thoughts?
I agree. Quicksilver is underdeveloped as a character. He's, I mean, he's a new character completely in the whole MCU in this movie, and he gets killed off by the end of it. If they really wanted his death to be impactful, they should have spent more time on his character. Really, made him more central to the plot and story. I mean, not that he wasn't. As I said, I struggled to label him like whether to make him a main character, side character, but I ultimately fell on the side. He's a side character because it's just in terms of character development, who he was as a character. He just was less developed compared to, say, Tony Stark or Black Widow.
Mm-hmm.
So in this movie. So
no, for sure. So, what are your guys' thoughts on the lasting impact of this film? Clearly, they made two more after it with the continuation of the Thanos storyline, and then you have another one coming even in the future with Avengers Doomsday. Do you guys think that this film has a lasting impact? Do you not? Avalon, what are your thoughts?
The mark the Avengers had, probably, I think, mostly comes from the first one, not this one. I mean, this one clearly continues the story, kept it in the present mind of people. Like, oh, continued. Oh, these characters are part of the team. There's new characters now, and it was interesting, and it provided some fun with Ultron and some other characters. I mean, as far as lasting impact goes, I think this is one of the. I mean, when you think of people mentioning the Avengers movies, I feel like this is the one that's least mentioned. I mean, just in terms of the four Avengers movies, this is probably the least one mentioned of the four. And to be perfectly honest, I think this movie probably had a bigger impact on the director of this movie than on the actual cultural consciousness. So,
Gotcha. And why do you say that?
well, because Joss Whedon famously quit Marvel after this movie because Marvel was forcing him to put a ton of stuff into this movie that he had no creative control over, and he was worn down by this movie supposedly to the point where he quit Marvel after this. He didn't want to work for Marvel after Age of Ultron. So,
Well, that makes sense. I was curious why we didn't see him because I looked into it and saw, oh, he's not credited for pretty much anything else except for a few short TV show episodes.
it's why the directors of Captain America Captain America Winter Soldier becomes the directors of the next two Avengers movies. The brothers.
Gotcha.
I'm forgetting their names, but you
The
know.
Russo brothers?
Yeah, the Russo brothers, yes.
Yeah. Fascinating. Andrew, what are your thoughts on the lasting impact of this film?
I think this film is this weird, like, enigma. Because in my opinion, it has the best Avengers villain that we've gotten so far. I think Ultron is more interesting and compelling than Thanos. People like Thanos a lot because has this like altruistic idea of he wants to protect the world from extinction by wiping out half the population. It's like, okay, it's not bad, but I think Ultron as a villain, as a concept, has so much more going for him than Thanos does. Thanos was built up for so long, and I think that's why he ends up being a fan favorite, because he's someone we've been waiting for and anticipating for so long. And I think the other problem this film runs into is that it kind of just got lost in the sauce, if you will. We had phase 1, which was the boy band phase, and we were all super hyped for Marvel, and we get phase 2. Phase 2, best movie in phase 2 is easily Captain America Winter Soldier. But you've also got movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man, Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World. So you've got like all these different superhero films that are all coming out, and it's kind of like we had this momentum and just kept chugging along, and people kind of looked at this film and went, oh, this is just a stereotypical Avengers film. Because at its core, kind of is, you've got the Avengers fighting a bad guy. And if you boil it down to that, then yeah, sure, it's just a basic film. But I think the fact that you have so much going for it, I think it's just genuinely a good Marvel film, even though there are things that could be better about it. I think it's probably my favorite, other than maybe Infinity War. I definitely like it better than Endgame, and I do like it better than the first Avengers film. Infinity War is the only one that I would maybe have a toss-up between, but I think just the combination of the villain and then Iron Man's arc in this film, as well as being able to effectively take so many characters, in my opinion, and actually give them some sort of compelling reason to be involved in the plot, just makes this film really good.
Sure. Well, when I was thinking about it, I was also a little confused on how this one was lost in the sauce, because in some ways I felt like it was trying to do something really unique, where it's trying to straddle a line that I don't normally see happen, where you will see two different types of sequels, right? You'll have sequels that try to stand on their own and surpass the original, right? You see that in films such as The Dark Knight. You see that in Captain America Winter Soldier. You see that in other films, such as that, where they're standalone and they build on these characters we already know, but they try to surpass the original, right? And they're distinct in their own ways. But they also have other films out there that are sequels that are intentionally built as a film that's supposed to continue on to another story, right? And they don't stand on their own necessarily, right? You get that with films such as Star Wars Episode 5, right? The Empire Strikes Back. You get that with what's the other ones that I had in mind? The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, uh, Deadman's Chest from the Pirates of the Caribbean series, right? You have these films that, sure, they are very interesting, they add a lot, but they don't by themselves complete the story. You have to have the next one to have the story completed. And those ones, while they can be good, they might even be better than the original, they are oftentimes, in some ways, intentionally overshadowed by the next film. And so I think that this one was trying to do a little bit of both, where it was definitely its own distinct story. You don't need the ones after it to necessarily get where this one is going, right? And in some ways, I do think this one surpasses the first one. I mean, it did so in my rating, so I clearly enjoyed it more, and I would definitely choose to watch this one more than I would watch the original Avengers movie personally. But that being said, there's also so much foreshadowing going on, so much complexity, and things are pushed to the margins when you have Quicksilver, when you have Thor and his whole arc, and all these other things going on, that I think that some things do get lost in the process, that you're not able to take this movie distinctly and say, wow, this is something I just want to watch all the time. You know, that was my impression of the film. That being said, it was clearly enough to keep the storyline going forward. Is it, and sometimes I play with this. Maybe this isn't worth a huge discussion, but the idea that because they had so much going on, maybe this would be better as a TV show. I'm not attached to that idea, but I just wonder if that would have given them enough organic content to delve into these things a little bit more and make it more concrete for us as audiences.
It could. I don't know, but the idea of putting Ultron in a TV show just feels like it's not doing him justice. I think the better way to go about this would have been maybe to introduce the twins sooner, and kind of set them up as characters earlier on, probably introduce them in some of the other Phase 2 movies, and then reintroduce them in this film, instead of just having them in like an end credit scene and then rushing through Pietro's story and rushing through Wanda's development. Kind of give us more reason to connect with them, more of an emotional connection, especially for Pietro. If you're going to kill him off, at least have him as a side character in another film, kind of like how you had Black Widow and what was it, Iron Man 2 and Captain America 2, and as well as in the Avengers movies.
And that's a good take as well. I think I could buy that. Avalon, any thoughts on that or parting thoughts for this?
My only problem with what Andrew just said is that technically, I mean, sure, that would work, but that also comes at the suffering of those other stories, those other movies, because you're forcing other characters into them that now have to play a part to be introduced for this movie. And it's the whole problem with the MCU, where it's like, I mean, sure, everything's interconnected, and everything is like leading to something else. I mean, and while sure that is interesting, the problem is like you can only take that so far before audiences get tired of it. And I mean, this becomes the never-ending story in some ways, and it's like these stories stop standing on their own because they're leading to something else. And it's like, and I do have a problem with that because I like my stories to be self-contained. And like, I'm not against sequels, but I like my sequels to also have a self-contained story, to be like something like beginning, middle, and end, without necessarily relying too heavily on other franchises and other movies per se. So
sure,
that's
it's definitely a hypothetical. Yeah,
no, it's a hypothetical, and I get it, but I'm just like, I personally take the stance that this movie should have either been like an hour or two longer, essentially, or you should have had a TV series, a mini series, or something where you could have developed these characters out, because the reality is we weren't given enough screen time to develop everyone out the way they should have been, or develop some of these story points out. I mean, it could have been. This movie wasn't a bad movie, not in my estimation. In fact, it could have been a great movie if they had more screen time for certain parts of it and given certain characters more development. But I don't personally think this is like an amazing movie, as Andrew says. I think, like, but it's not a bad movie either. I enjoyed it still.
Yeah.
So.
No. And if anything, maybe Marvel knew or took notes on this and decided, oh, we should make TV shows. But then you got Falcon and Winter Soldier, you got Hawkeye, you got all these other series that She-Hulk that I don't know that they really necessarily stand the test that we think are fantastic stories, but those might be due to other reasons as well. So maybe we're getting a little too lost in the sauce. The point is, Avengers Age of Ultron was here. a lot of us enjoyed it a lot, but in some ways, in the public psyche, it's overshadowed by what's to come. So we will get to those next week, but for now, we're going to leave it as it is. That's all we got for you. We hope you all enjoyed because we'll be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.